Well, hello, Anne Emery. Welcome to Community Possibilities.
Thanks, Anne.
So, we've been chatting for a few minutes about being uh, consultants and having our own business and giving ourselves permission to make mistakes. And oh, yeah, being a mom and being a business person, all those things. But do you know that we have actually never met in person?
We must have met each other at some evaluation conference. We didn't have we even passed each other in the hallway and waved at some point? No.
We've probably passed each other in the hallway, but we've probably never would have. Remember, so we were just having this conversation about introvert, extrovert. Oh my gosh, no, but don't don't think I'm creeping out on you or anything. But I actually have been following your career for a long time,
I
but we
feel
have
like we
never
know each
met.
other though. I feel like I've been following your career. That's why I know you've been married 36 years. You used to
Oh
be a
my gosh.
therapist. Yeah.
I think the first time I ever saw you present, and I don't know the year because I didn't do the research, but I think you were still working for the Innovation Network.
Probably. I was working there till 2014. So, I mean, it's kind of been a while, but kind of not.
So that's how long I've been following your career. So just so you know.
You
Be-
Most importantly, you follow my Insta stories, which actually people shouldn't do because that's the one place I'm myself, my unfiltered self. So that you know all about me if you
well, I think we should always be our unfiltered self.
yeah.
Truly, truly. The
Yeah.
other place you and I know each other, and this is how we virtually know each other, is through Heather Sager's Speak Up to Level Up class. And I can't remember how it must have been on Instagram that I saw that you were doing that. And here's why that intrigued me because, and I'm not just like blowing smoke. You are absolutely one of the best trainers and teachers that I have ever had. Seriously. And I wanted to do this podcast and I was really nervous. And I thought, well, by God, if that's somebody Anne is following and learning from, I'm jumping on that train.
That's funny because that's actually why I started working with Heather was somebody else I followed, a writing coach who's like writing programs I've since taken, said she was already what I thought was a really good public speaker. I've taken her programs and her online course and really, really liked it. And she put on Instagram like, oh, I wanted to up my game. I wanted to get even better. So I started working with a speaking coach. And I was like, is that something people do? Because I had thought speaking coaches were like Toastmasters, which I've been to a couple times. It wasn't the right fit for me. I know some people love it, but I was like, oh, I don't like this whole speaking thing. And then I think that just kind of normalized the idea for me that it's okay to work with coaches and take training. Like, duh, I do dataviz training for a living, but I guess just
Right.
the idea of investing in my own training, it was like, oh, I'd never even thought of that. So yeah. And I started working with Heather, I think in fall 2019. So you would have joined in 2020,
Hmm.
maybe.
I think I was the COVID cohort.
And now you have a podcast.
And now I have a podcast. Because one of the things that Heather talks about is speaking and not second guessing yourself, because people are always surprised when I say I'm an introvert, and they're always surprised when I say I'm nervous speaking. But that's really true. But if you do the work that I do, which is working out into communities with community groups, usually pre-COVID time, then you have to be comfortable in your own skin. You can't spend a lot of time in anxiety. So that was one of the reasons why I did that. But enough about me. I want to hear about you. And I always ask people to introduce yourself, but I don't want to hear your resume. I don't want to hear your resume. I want to hear what kind of makes you tick and yeah, who you really are.
Now
Your Insta story version.
I wish we would have recorded like the pre-recording when we were just saying hello when we first signed on. Oh, well, I'm a dataviz designer. That's the boring resume part. Well, not boring to me. I love it. I love it. But maybe some people listening aren't data people. Maybe they're more like on the community side, which is totally cool. I have 3 kids. And as you know, I am trying to take like a half maternity leave at the moment. I thought rather than stepping away from work for a few months, like I don't think that's realistic. And it's actually not something I want to do. I thought, let me just kind of work part days for as long as it works. So I go biking in the mornings. Sometimes I go swimming in the evenings, and yeah, that's about it. That's about all I have time for. I feel like you blink and it's the end of the day and you're like, what did I do today? My to-do list is 10 miles long and you get through this much in one day.
Yeah, for sure. And congratulations on the new baby.
Thanks.
So that's something else you and I have in common, although I'm further down the road than you are, because my baby is 21, but I have 3 kids.
I'm going to blink and mine will be 21.
Yeah, that is so true. That is really true. I used to get so annoyed when people would stop me in the grocery store and, I must have had that frustrated mom look on my face and they would say, oh, but they grew up so fast. And I so wanted to slap them. And now I know what they mean.
I feel like they always say that too when your kid's crying and you're having a tired day, or maybe you have an annoyed look on your face, because we're human. Guess what? Like, people have bad days and somebody's like, oh, enjoy this. Okay.
So another thing that you and I have in common, and I don't know if you know this, but I grew up in Florida.
I did know that.
So
I think I called it the hangy over part one time.
The hangy over part.
Panhandle?
The panhandle of Florida, right? And I swear, you almost live in Disney World now. So that's pretty awesome. So the other thing you and I have in common is that we both love to travel. And I can barely get my husband to travel, let alone traveling with 2 small kids. So, all right, tell the truth. How was that? And I'm really curious if after your world travels, did that kind of make you a different person? Did that make you did it make you think about data visualization better, or the work you do in a different way?
Yeah. It was worth it. It was amazing. We would have traveled another year had COVID not shut everything down. It's actually crazy right now because the digital nomad lifestyle is like a new hot thing where everybody's like, wow, I can work from anywhere. So I'm going to work from such and such country or such and such mountain town or wherever their dream spot is. And I'm like, aren't we supposed to all be staying home right now? Like, stop traveling, stay put. But, yeah, I've done like a flip flop. Now I just sit in my office all day long in my pool. Like, that's it. It took a full year for me to convince my husband to travel. So that was like a big thing because he had a salaried government job. Like, are we going to give up the pension? How do we afford the health insurance? Like, those were huge discussions. And, data viz wise, I think traveling had some really concrete effects. Things like making sure my examples aren't just US based. Like, if I'm teaching about maps, maybe I have a US map, but then on the next slide, maybe I show a Canadian example I'm thinking of like the Canadian Evaluation Society members that I work with. And then I show an example from Africa or Asia or Latin America, or things like currency, making sure you don't just have the USD symbol, but having like euros or other currencies and examples. Some countries, I honestly don't know if it's all European countries or not, but they put how we do commas and periods, they do the opposite, which my brain takes twice as long to interpret. I'm like, what number am I looking at here? Like, it just takes a while. And one bad side effect is I learned I'm not funny in other countries.
What?
I'm probably not funny at all in the US, but I laugh all day long as I'm like teaching and I'm doing things like this. I just get a kick out of data, I guess. But when you're speaking through a translator in some other countries, like, they can't translate jokes as well. And you're just speaking facts to make sure you're well understood. And that's not a very fun training if there's not as many personal stories or facts or reflections on how things are going. So I haven't figured that out yet. How to actually, make a great engaging training when you're speaking through a translator.
Oh, that's really fabulous. So, so one of the things that I wanted to do with my kids, because God knows I have 8 brothers and sisters, there was no world travel in my family. But I wanted to make sure that my kids got outside the United States so that they understood how big the world was. So when, they each got to pick a trip. So I've been to France with my oldest. I went to Spain with the middle one. And we went to England with the third. And yeah, I'm so ready to get out there. But I hope what it gave them is a sense of how big the world is. Like, to your point, when you're depicting data or you're talking about problems, we get so isolated sometimes here in this country. So, well, let's talk about what drew you to the work now besides COVID and you had to park yourself. So what kind of things are you doing now?
I'm pretty focused nowadays. I used to try a little bit of everything. I used to do some evaluation consulting because that was my career. It still is my career in many ways before I focused on dataviz. So I used to do like evaluation consulting and dataviz consulting where I would design a dashboard for somebody or design an infographic. And I did training. And now I'm just doing training because there's only one of me. Like there's only so many hours in the day. Yes, I could hire a team. I tried that. I tried subcontracting to people too. That worked okay, kind of, until you're on a plane to Africa for like 48 hours of travel time with no Wi-Fi, and there's still deadlines coming and going. I just felt like, oh, this is too stressful for me to like, you arrive in the airport, like I gotta connect to Wi-Fi and check those emails and coordinate with people. Yeah. So just training nowadays. And I got into it, I think the same way a lot of us get into this type of work. I just got frustrated with how things were going. I thought there's so much good work being done in the world, but I used to work inside a nonprofit, inside of a couple of different nonprofits. And I just felt like, obviously we wanted to do the most good in the community possible. And we needed the data to help us do that. And as the internal evaluator, I couldn't communicate with the staff if I wrote all paragraphs, paragraph after paragraph after paragraph, but they responded really well to graphs. So I picked up on that really quickly and just thought like, oh, let me make a dashboard for them. Let me make a one pager. Let me make some slides with some graphs that they can use. And it was like the magic solution that got them interested in the data. So yeah.
Oh,
that's
yay.
it. Yeah.
Another thing we have in common. I used to work at ICF, and one of my jobs was to do a data brief for the client. And
I used to work at ICF.
What? Okay, 5 things.
And our name.
Oh yeah, 6. So one of the things that I had to do was this data brief, right? So you had to take, 1 or 2 data points and make it kind of tell a story around it, right? Kind of make it interesting. So I've been really interested in that whole concept for a long time. And I think it's really important if we're working in the public health or the social change space to depict our data in a way that makes people want to engage. And I don't know if there's anything else you want to talk about that, but that's kind of what's on my mind lately is we live in this crazy world.
I actually made a list for you. I was thinking about this all morning of like how to get the nonprofits, the foundations, the coalitions, like the social good groups that you and I both work with, how to get them kind of into dataviz more. And the first thing I wrote was get everyone involved and engaged early and often. Isn't it funny? We're like the same person.
I want your Disney pass though.
They're not selling annual passes at the moment, but soon, someday, because going for a day is so expensive. I'd rather just buy the annual pass and go.
Sorry, I took
every Friday.
I totally took us down a rabbit hole there. You were saying get them involved early and often. What else?
Okay, here's one that's really nerdy and in the weeds, but it's so important. So I'm going to try my best to describe it. And maybe I'm going to have to write a blog post about this. So you can like link to the blog post once it's done. Sharing aggregated or disaggregated data based on who the audience is. Sometimes people hear the terms aggregated and disaggregated, and they're like, what language are you speaking?
Yes, exactly.
So I'm thinking of when I used to be the internal evaluator at a nonprofit. We ran a bunch of different programs. We had substance abuse programs. We had mental health counseling programs. We had a foster care program. the example I keep thinking of, this was kind of like my aha moment when I finally figured this out, was a GED program. So the staff were training the high schoolers, doing practice tests, doing educational things to get them ready to pass the GED test. And there were so many people who cared about the GED scores, right? Or the practice tests.
Mm-hmm.
Like the people in the program, the students, they cared. They wanted to see if they were getting better. The staff running the program, they need a little bit different data. The executive director, the board, the current funders, the prospective funders, like the grant makers, they need different data. So the students in the program, they need disaggregated data. They actually just need their own. They're like, how's Anne doing?
Right.
Am I improving? So I'm picturing like a line graph.
Mm-hmm.
They just need to know, like, did I start here and then kind of go up over time as I practice more and learn more? But then the staff running the program, sure, they care about how like Anne's doing compared to, somebody else, but they also need a little bit of aggregated data. They need like, how are all 10 people doing as a whole, like a mean or a median, which is aggregated. And then of course, somebody at even a higher up level, like an executive director, a board of directors, funders, prospective funders, they definitely need aggregated data because they don't have time to get in the weeds and hear about how like little old Anne's doing. They want to know, okay, how's this entire cohort of a group doing? Are they improving, as a team, like as a class of people? I started making some graphs to show that. So that's what I guess now that I'm saying it like publicly, I'll have to finish that blog post. I have a whole folder of unfinished drafts, but I started putting that together for you.
Yeah, I'm with you, sister. I know exactly what you mean. Totally. So I was curious as to, as I said, crazy. We all know we're living in a crazy world these last, 4 or 5 years. And I found that when I was going to speak out in communities, people were more and more and more suspicious about data. Where did you get that data from? How do you know that's not true based on their N of one, right? And I was just curious if you had run into that too, and how do you handle that when people kind of push back on data and whether or not it's accurate and can be trusted?
I have run into that, and in a certain scenario. So let's see if this is just my N of one, or if you've had the same thing happen. I've run into the pushback when there are negative findings. Like there's bad news in the data. I've found that that's when people are like, that can't be right. That's not accurate. Well, you must have only surveyed a few people, or maybe you had a typo in there. And they like, I think cognitive dissonance, you're a psychologist, so I can geek out with you about these terms, but I think that's the right term, where it's like, you think that the project, the program, the community, you think something's going well, maybe.
Right.
And then this outside data person who you don't know that well, who might be new to your project, is like, I don't know, I found all these bad things in your data and I wrote up a whole report showing you what a bad job you're doing. And you're like, I don't trust them. They're an outsider. Where's that data from? And how I see it expressed is usually people might raise their hand in a meeting and say like, can you double check those numbers? Or, oh, but the time frame of your data collection was funny, or but you didn't interview the right people. Like I see it expressed as doubts in the data collection process, but therefore doubts in me and my trustworthiness as the data collector. Usually when you go in and you're like, everything's going well, what wonderful findings, they're like, yeah, I trust you. I love the data. I trust data. So is that when you've seen it, do you think?
Well, I don't know if it's about positive or disagreeing with the findings that they were expecting. Maybe that's it. Where I find it, because I do a lot of substance abuse prevention work, is if we're looking at surveillance data, so kids reporting 30-day use or things that risk and protective factors around adolescent substance use. And they're very suspicious. So they usually start with, well, kids lie, which actually we know that kids are actually pretty honest. As you're probably learning as a parent, kids are very, very honest. And when you ask them something, they usually tell you the truth, even when we're asking about high risk behavior. But that's the first thing is like, well, kids lie. And I usually say, well, if we look at 30-day use over the last 10 years, if kids are lying, they're lying very consistently because these data have not changed. Pretty much. If we look at communities where there's been an intervention compared to communities where there's not, there's a difference. So maybe it's not in the reporting. Maybe that's not the issue. And then they kind of like scratch their head. So that's usually what I
wonder if it's also that people are always comparing the data to themselves. So if a teenager's like, I smoke cigarettes every single day, and the person's like, I only tried smoking cigarettes once in my adolescence, one time for fun or whatever. And maybe there's just such a disconnect there that they just can't imagine somebody else's experience might be different from theirs. I don't know. I'm just thinking aloud here.
Yeah. Yeah. But it just feels like people question everything. Right. So in the conversation that I recorded last week that hasn't been posted yet, I interviewed a young man who's very active in voting rights, right? And so people think that our voting systems are fraudulent, right? That people who are dead are voting, or people are pretending there's somebody else, right? So we're very mistrustful of all information. Now, it seems, I shouldn't say we're not all, but many people seem to be very distrusting of data and of science. And as a data person, that's got to be kind of exhausting and frustrating and make you a little sad.
Yeah, I think the frustration comes in for me when I'm with fellow data people. And I have to remind all of us that most people are not data people. Like most people don't just say like, well, great, the CDC collected this data, or the NIH has this data, or the World Health Organization like said this thing's true. Like us data people usually do trust that because we know about all the behind the scenes work to make sure that data is accurate.
Yes.
And we can picture like the teams of dozens or hundreds of people working like crazy to make sure everything's as accurate as possible. And like, I can picture methodology sections of reports talking about all the caveats and all the disclaimers because people are like, hey, we're about 99% accurate here, but like there might be this one weakness or limitation in the study. Like us data people know that, but it's like we're in this little bubble where we're all friends with fellow data people and we work with fellow data people. And you have to remember like the rest of the world,
right?
They want to hear the stories. They want to see the photographs. They want to, they want to like see people talking on video about their experiences and see more of the small and disaggregated data. So yeah, that's tricky. Even just sometimes in trainings showing people like, it's okay to have tables of data because that speaks to the data people, but like, we also need graphs. We also need photos. We can't just have a long report. We also need an infographic or something shorter. Like not everybody is like us.
Right.
We're like the tiny little pocket of society.
Right. Yeah. And that gets back to what you were saying before about, step one, right? We know this from the time we all started doing this work. Engage stakeholders, think about the audience and what they need and how they're going to use that information. In order to get them to use the information, they have to trust the information. And that's what seems to be really hard. But to your point, we don't often talk about all the behind the scenes, that cleaning the data and what that had to go through before that was really, I imagine some people wouldn't even trust that though, truthfully. sad, but true.
I don't know, maybe the past year or year and a half, though, has been irregular in that sense, just because there are just so many things going on, like politically and societally, that I think just trust in government or trust in institutions has disappeared. I don't know. This feels different to me. Like people are more distrustful than normal, I think.
Yeah, I agree, which is why I wanted to kind of get your take on that and see if you were having the same kind of experiences that I was. But it just speaks to how people who are in the data visualization work or evaluation space, we've got to get better about talking about this stuff in a way that is accessible to people, in a way that gets people to trust the information. So you were talking earlier about tips for coalition types, nonprofit types, foundations. Any other tips that you want to share about things they need to think about when they're talking about their data or sharing their data?
I do have a third one, but it's easy. So remind me to cover it before we sign out. But I just thought of something also about the distrust of data, because right before this, I was speaking with a woman, Lauren, who's in one of my courses, and we were doing like screen sharing, looking at her dashboard. And we were having a similar conversation. And she was like, I know you don't want me to have all these tables and all these sheets of data in my Excel spreadsheet. I know that the best practice is like focus people on some key takeaway findings in a dashboard. But she was like, I'm going to respectfully ignore that advice because I want people, she didn't say trust. How did she word it? It was basically like, she was running a Head Start program, and she wanted the Head Start program directors to like see the student data behind the scenes and see that she had raw data in there, so that they wouldn't think she just like pulled the numbers out of thin air, you know? And I'm like, well, we could at least hide those sheets maybe, so they don't get overwhelmed when they open up this Excel file. It's got a dozen little sheets in the bottom. Right. And she was like, I feel like I kind of want to show it. And when we talked more about it, of like, what was the word I'm gonna have to reach back out to her. She didn't say trust, but it was basically trust of like, let's have people see the data's there and they can check it for themselves. And she'd added some conditional formatting to make like typos and data pop out, so people could correct their data and have a chance to look at it. And she's like, you know, I want them to know like there is data behind this dashboard, even though they're not supposed to look at it too much. So maybe that's a quick fix of just like showing people more data, you know, including more appendices and reports, right? That they don't necessarily have to look at, but they know the appendices are there.
Right. Right. And you know what, that made me think of using video to explain our results, right? Because immediately came to mind, and I definitely got this idea from you, so I totally give you credit for this. I am working with a nonprofit here in Georgia, and they need to get some implementation, some indicators for their new strategic plan. And it was done in Excel. So I just added some columns, indicator, measurement, and then like, you know, gaps. So what information are we missing here? That kind of thing. And I didn't want to just like hand them the Excel spreadsheet and dig, because some people look at a spreadsheet, and this one is not numbers based, but typically people who are not familiar with spreadsheets look at that and just, they immediately shut down. Right. So I thought about you, and I actually created a video and sent it to the executive director and said, okay, here's what I've done with your spreadsheet. Here are some indicators that I'm thinking about. Here's where we're going to get that measurement. Here's some things we still need to think about. I want you to take a look at this and see if it's ready to send to the kind of internal committee that's working on this. And that really worked really well. So that's one of the things that we could do, is think about how to communicate. So to that person's point, that might be really helpful. So maybe she does a video that shows everything and then closes it up. Like, okay, now I'm pulling back the curtain so that all you need to do is focus on what you need to focus on.
Yeah, she actually said she shares her dashboard in Zoom meetings. So it is this sense-making process of having people say like, oh, this really stands out to me, or that's different from what I expected. And they talk about what the key findings are together. So I think that's really helpful. I've started doing more videos too. I mean, you know, I do like trainings, right, which are videos, but sometimes instead of writing an email, I'll just make somebody a quick Loom video or a Screencast-O-Matic video, because I blame Heather for this, blame in a good way. I give her credit for this. I start typing sometimes and I'm just like, this isn't exactly what I want to communicate. And it takes so long and I'm just editing myself too much. So if I just turn on the video and I just say, hey, I was starting to write you an email, but I just want to make sure that this is really clear to you. You know, here's a couple main points. And they're like, oh, wow, I understand exactly what you're saying. And sometimes it's stuff about like a contract or an invoice or what might we cover in the dataviz training together, like just little, you know, everyday emails that we all have. So maybe we need to do that more with evaluation findings.
Yeah. I mean, I think so. I mean, I think everything's on the table. Dashboards, infographics, success stories, data briefs, all of the things should be on the table, whatever they need. I think you had a third tip. Did we cover it?
Yeah, it's more of a reassurance that dataviz doesn't have to be so hard. Sometimes people hear that term data visualization and it has so many syllables and they think it's really fancy or out of reach or expensive or time consuming. And I mean, you know me and my background, but my focus is all about data viz in everyday software. You don't have to go learn coding unless you want to.
Exactly.
You don't have to go to graphic design school unless you want to, but it's okay to use everyday software and just tweak the default settings a lot. And then like, let it go, like leave it be. It doesn't need to be perfect. Usually the recipients aren't expecting perfection. They just need a little bit of data to inform their decisions so they can like go on with their lives and tackle the next thing in their to-do list.
Right. Yeah. And that's what we really want is data for decision making for sure. So when you look at the future, what community possibilities do you see?
Oh my gosh. I feel like so many cool things. This is really specific, but so many cool things have been happening with like the LGBT community since my lifetime. And seeing that all those advances for my kids growing up are just going to be normal. Like when I was growing up, if somebody was going to come out, that usually happened in like high school or college. But kids nowadays, it's like when they feel comfortable, they're going to feel comfortable even earlier because it's just normal.
Yeah.
And like, that's so exciting for me. Or it won't have to be like the end of the world to like come out to your parents. That'll just be normal. Or you won't have to fight for marriage equality because that'll just be normal. And like seeing that things that are like people are fighting for right now won't have to be a fight for future generations. That's really exciting. And like the racial equity work where, oh, it's like so much work's being done with that right now. And like, that's just going to make it even easier for coming generations, you know, to get a lot of the challenges out of the way.
Right. And, you know, that's one of the things that I'm trying to do in my communities. And I know the people that I work with we talk about whatever the public health problem or social problem, maybe it's high school graduation. And we'll have communities say, well, we have a great high school graduation rate in our community. But then if we dig down, talk about disaggregating data, right? If we really dig down and see who's doing well and who's not. So as a field, we have to get better, right? We have to get better at digging in. Yeah, to your point, for sure. Hey, I don't know if you noticed, but do you see my mug? So, truth be told, folks, so I'm one of Anne's students. I'm probably one of Anne's worst students. I think I have your Excel class, your dashboard class. I know I've done your free Dusty Shelf Report class, which I think changed my life. My clients, thank you very much. So do you want to talk about maybe some of the classes that you offer and what you have to offer other folks?
You are not one of the worst students. I don't know why the best students always say that about themselves, because maybe like our bars are so high for ourselves. I don't know.
But let me stop you there, because you do all these like fabulous like live trainings, and I haven't been able to do a darn thing in a couple of months, but I love having those in my pocket, because I'm not going to have a suite of younglings anymore at my feet. I'm doing a different business model, but I know if I have to do it, I can go to that class and it's there for me. So anyway, I'm sorry I interrupted you.
When you're ready, I'm here for you. We do office hours almost every week. I might pop into your office hours. I don't think I'm quite your ideal person for those, but I might be. I know you do them on Fridays?
Every,
I feel like you,
yeah, 2 weeks out of the month. Yeah. On Fridays, 11 o'clock
okay.
Eastern Standard Time.
I'm going to come to one of your next ones.
Oh my gosh, you'll freak everybody out.
I'm also going to send you more stickers because I like the ones people listening to the podcast have no idea what you just did, but
Oh, that's true. That is
people
true.
who are watching the YouTube ones.
Yes.
So got some fun data stickers.
So I've got my dataviz sticker on one side of my Yeti, and I have my dataviz on the other side of my Yeti. That's what we're talking about. So Ann sends out swag to her students.
The whole top drawer up there is full of stickers. So I'm going to send you a sticker pack.
Yay.
Yeah, courses, probably the best way for people to connect is the mini course you mentioned, Soar Beyond the Dusty Shelf Report. That one's really quick. It's maybe half an hour of videos. So, you get in, learn some practical tips, go use them. And that's a really good course too for people who maybe are just getting started with dataviz, or you want to convince your colleagues or your supervisor that dataviz is worth it, and kind of see some before and after examples and some easy to implement techniques in there. Like the 33-1 approach is in there. What data storytelling really means and how to make key findings pop out is in there. That's probably the best spot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I try really hard not to, I kind of cringe seriously when I go back to in my early days when I wrote 80-page reports. And truth be told, so Susan Wolf and I wrote a big report for a client. We were trying really hard. I swear, Anne, we were really trying hard to do the 1-3-30. We put as much stuff as we could in the appendix, but it was a summary of a 5-year grant. We just couldn't make the 30 pages, but that course is a great course for folks to start with, to really see just how visual reporting really can be and how much more engaging, because nobody wants to read that big honking report, really.
Nobody has time. I mean, even if somebody wants to, even if they're able to, it's not that people aren't smart or highly educated or hardworking. I think it's just, there's so much data out there that nobody's got time to pour through all of it. But that's the value that we can add, is doing that hard work for people and just summarizing it for them.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's so much good work to be done in the world. And I think data visualization experts like yourself and evaluators certainly have a role to play. So I really appreciate you being on the podcast today. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. I learned that we were twins in many, many ways, which is really cool.
That is awesome.